Single dad's daughter noticed a deaf waitress struggling with orders, then what they did changed everything. Before we continue, please tell us where in the world are you tuning in from? We love seeing how far our stories travel. Lucas Crawford was sitting in the parking lot of Murphy's Diner on a Thursday evening in late September, staring at his steering wheel like it had personally offended him. And in the back seat, his 9-year-old daughter Maisie was doing that thing where she picked at the edge of her backpack strap without saying anything, which meant speech therapy had been rough again. They did this every Thursday, same routine for the past 4 months since they'd moved to this little nothing town outside Cincinnati. Therapy at 4:30 with Miss Karen, who was patient and kind, and everything a speech therapist should be. Then dinner at Murphy's at 6 because Lucas couldn't face cooking after 10 hours of running electrical work on construction sites and pretending he had his life together. Here's the thing about watching your kids struggle with something you can't fix. It makes you feel like the most useless person on the planet. And Lucas had spent the better part of a year watching Maisie's stutter get worse after they'd moved, after she'd left her old school and her friends and everything familiar, because he'd needed to take a job that paid enough to cover rent and her therapy and the regular life stuff that doesn't stop just because your kid's having a hard time. She used to talk nonstop, like from the second she woke up until bedtime. It was constant chatter about everything and nothing. And now she'd go whole days barely saying 10 words because she was so scared of getting stuck on the sounds. And it absolutely killed him to watch her shrink like that. He turned around in his seat and said, "You hungry, bug?" And Maisie nodded without looking up. And Lucas tried again because he'd read all the parenting articles about not letting her retreat into silence. "Miss Karen said you did good today working on your breathing exercises. I'm really proud of you." And Maisie's face did this little thing where she almost smiled but didn't quite commit. And she said, "It was okay," and only stumbled a tiny bit on the okay. And Lucas decided that was a win and they should quit while they were ahead and just go eat some mediocre diner food. Murphy's Diner looked exactly like every small-town diner you've ever seen. Red vinyl booths that were cracked in places, black and white checkered floor that had seen better decades, a jukebox in the corner that hadn't worked since probably 1990-something, and exactly 4 things on the menu that were actually good if you knew what to order. Lucas and Maisie walked in and the little bell above the door did its thing, and Jean, the owner, was behind the counter, looking tired in that way. People look when they've been running the same business for 30 years and it's slowly dying, but they don't know how to do anything else. They slid into their usual booth near the window, and Lucas grabbed 2 menus. Even though they both knew what they were getting, Thursday was grilled cheese and tomato soup for Maisie and a burger for him. Hadn't changed in 4 months and probably wasn't going to change anytime soon. That's when Lucas noticed the waitress heading toward them. Wasn't Sheila, who'd been working Thursdays since they started coming. And this new woman looked maybe late 20s, dark hair pulled back in a ponytail, moving between tables with this careful, deliberate way, like she was concentrating really hard on not messing anything up. She got to their table and pulled out a small notepad and pen. Didn't say the usual, "Hey folks, what can I get you?" that waitresses say, just smiled and held out the notepad with something already written at the top in neat handwriting that said, "Hi, I'm Hannah. I'm deaf. I can read lips if you speak clearly and look at me, or you can write your order, whatever's easier for you." Lucas blinked at it for a second, processing, then looked up at her face and said slowly and clearly, "Hey, Hannah, I'm Lucas. This is Maisie. Nice to meet you." And Hannah's smile got a little more genuine, and she nodded and pointed at the notepad like, "Okay, what do you want to eat?" Maisie was staring at Hannah with that wide-eyed look kids get when they notice something different and haven't learned yet to pretend they don't notice, and Lucas worried for a second she might say something awkward, the way kids do. But Maisie just watched while Lucas ordered their usual, speaking slower than normal and making sure Hannah could see his mouth. Grilled cheese and tomato soup for her, burger with fries for me, and 2 chocolate milkshakes, please. And Hannah wrote it down, gave them a thumbs up, and headed back toward the kitchen. And Lucas watched Maisie watch her walk away with this thoughtful expression that meant his kid was working something out in her head. The diner was maybe half full, couple of truckers at the counter, a family with loud kids in the corner booth, and this businessman type in a suit at a table near the kitchen, furiously typing on his laptop like he was way too important to be eating at Murphy's Diner, but here he was anyway. Lucas was helping Maisie with her homework, basic multiplication stuff that she was flying through because math didn't require talking, when he heard the businessman's voice get sharp and annoyed, and he looked up to see Hannah standing at the guy's table with her notepad looking confused, and the guy gesturing impatiently. I said, no onions. Can you not hear me? No onions on the burger. And the guy was talking way too fast and not looking at her face at all, talking down at his laptop. And Hannah was trying to position herself to see his lips, but he kept moving. She wrote something and showed him the notepad, and the businessman actually rolled his eyes. This is ridiculous. Just get me someone who can understand English. And his voice was loud enough that Jean looked over from the counter and a couple other people glanced up. And Hannah's face went carefully blank in that way people's faces do when they're used to this kind of thing and have learned not to react. Jean walked over and smoothed it out, took the guy's order himself while Hannah stepped back. And Lucas felt this wash of secondhand embarrassment for her, mixed with irritation at the businessman who was acting like basic human decency was too much to ask. He wondered why Hannah didn't just use a tablet or phone app, seemed like an obvious fix. But later he learned from Jean that they'd tried that the first week and customers complained about the wait time and said it felt impersonal. Some people just wanted to complain no matter what solution you offered. Hannah brought their food out 10 minutes later, set it down carefully, smiled at Maisie especially, and Maisie watched her with that same thoughtful look. And when Hannah turned to go, Maisie's hand came up and she made a sign, fingers moving in this deliberate way that Lucas recognized from the inclusion assembly at her school last year. Hannah stopped dead and turned around, and Maisie signed again, and Lucas realized his daughter was signing "Thank you" in ASL, and Hannah's entire face transformed, went from professionally pleasant to genuinely surprised and happy. And she signed back, "You're welcome," and then fingers spelled, "How do you know sign?" And Maisie got shy immediately, ducked her head, and Lucas jumped in. Her school does an inclusion program. All the kids learn some basic signs. She's been practicing. Which was true. Maisie had come home a few times showing him signs she'd learned, though he hadn't realized she'd retained any of it. Hannah's eyes got a little shiny, and she signed something to Maisie that Lucas didn't understand, then gave them both a genuine smile that reached all the way to her eyes and went back to work. And Lucas looked at his daughter who was staring at her grilled cheese with the tiniest smile on her face, and something in his chest that had been tight for months loosened just a fraction. They ate their dinner and Maisie was quiet, but it was a different kind of quiet. Not the anxious withdrawal she'd been doing for weeks, more like she was thinking about something that made her happy. And when they left, she waved at Hannah, who waved back from across the diner. In the truck on the way home, Lucas said, "That was really nice what you did, signing to her. I bet that made her whole night." And Maisie said, without stuttering, "Kids at my old school used to make fun of Zoe because she's deaf, but she was my friend, and I learned signs so we could talk. I didn't think about it, I just did it." And Lucas had to grip the steering wheel harder because his kid's heart was so good, it physically hurt him sometimes. "That was really thoughtful, Bug. I'm proud of you." And Maisie went back to looking out the window, but he could see her reflection smiling in the glass. What Lucas didn't know was that across town in a tiny apartment that was basically just one room with a bathroom, Hannah was sitting on her bed looking at her bank account on her phone showing $1,847 and doing math in her head for the 100th time. She was working 3 jobs, the diner 4 nights a week, stocking shelves at the grocery store 3 mornings a week, and walking dogs every weekend for people in the nicer neighborhood across town. And all of it was pointed toward one goal, which was saving enough to move to Columbus or Cleveland or literally anywhere with an actual deaf community where she wouldn't be the only one, where she could exist without constantly explaining herself. This town was temporary. It had always been temporary. She'd moved here 8 months ago because she'd needed to leave a situation that wasn't safe, and this was where the bus ticket she could afford had taken her. And she'd promised herself she wouldn't get attached to places or people, because attached meant stuck and stuck meant vulnerable. The diner job was the newest addition, just started 2 weeks ago, and it was already clear it wasn't going to last. Jean had pulled her aside yesterday and said real apologetic, "Hannah, you're a hard worker, but I'm getting complaints and I can't afford to lose customers. I'll keep you through the end of the month, but you should probably start looking for something else. And she nodded like it was fine because what else could she do? She closed her banking app and opened her notes where she kept track of her timeline. At her current rate, she'd have 3,000 saved by January, which was enough for first month, last month, deposit on a studio apartment in a bigger city, plus a little cushion, and she could do this. She just had to keep her head down and not let anything derail the plan. But then her brain kept circling back to the little girl at the diner. Couldn't have been more than 9 or 10, signing thank you with this shy, careful precision like she'd practiced it, and Hannah hadn't expected that, hadn't expected to feel seen in this town where she'd been invisible on purpose. And she didn't know what to do with the warm feeling it had left in her chest, except ignore it and stick to the plan, because plans were safe and people were not. 2 weeks after that first Thursday when Maisie signed thank you, Lucas and his daughter walked into Murphy's diner expecting their usual routine and found someone else working their section. And the disappointment on Maisie's face lasted maybe 5 seconds before she shrugged and went back to her homework like kids do when something small doesn't go their way. But Lucas felt this weird drop in his stomach that he didn't want to examine too closely. The new waitress was Sheila again, same woman who'd been working Thursdays before Hannah showed up, and she took their order with the efficient disinterest of someone who'd been slinging hash for 20 years and had exactly zero energy left for small talk. Lucas almost asked where Hannah was, but stopped himself because that felt like overstepping some invisible line. Like, what was he going to say? Hey, where's that deaf waitress? We liked her better. And that sounded weird even in his head, so he just kept his mouth shut and helped Maisie with her fractions while they waited for food. Maisie looked up once and said, "Where's the nice waitress?" And her voice only caught a tiny bit on the W and where. And Lucas said, "I don't know, Bug. Maybe she's working different nights now. People's schedules change sometimes." And Maisie said, "That's sad," with this matter-of-fact tone, and went right back to her math worksheet. And that was it. The entire extent of her reaction, because she was 9 and had her own stuff going on, and one kind waitress disappearing wasn't the end of her world. But Lucas couldn't shake it, kept thinking about it while he ate his burger. And when Jean came around refilling coffees, Lucas caught his eye and said real casual, "Hey, Jean, that new waitress from the past couple weeks. Hannah, she working different days now?" Jean's face did this uncomfortable thing, and he glanced around like he was making sure nobody was listening, then said quiet, "Nah, had to let her go. Wasn't working out. Got too many complaints from customers about the communication thing. Felt bad about it, but I can't have people walking out before they order. You know how it is." Lucas nodded, because he did know how it was. Jean was running a dying diner in a town that was losing population every year. He couldn't afford to lose a single customer over anything. It was pure survival math, and there was no villain in that equation, just reality. But still, Lucas heard himself saying, "She seemed like she was really trying, though. Always got our order right. Maisie really liked her." And Jean's face softened a little. "I know, man, she was sweet, hard worker too, stayed late cleaning without being asked, but trying hard doesn't pay my bills when I got people complaining to my face. Had to make a business decision." They left it at that, and Lucas paid the check and drove Maisie home, and the whole thing sat heavy in his chest in a way he couldn't quite name. Maybe because he'd spent the last year watching his own kid struggle with something she couldn't control, and seeing people lose patience with her when she got stuck on words. And there was something that felt parallel about Hannah trying her best in a world that didn't want to make space for the trying. Thursday came around again the week after that, and they did their usual routine, therapy, then diner. And while Maisie was in the bathroom, Lucas found himself standing at the counter waiting to pay, and Jean was there looking more tired than usual. Lucas said, "Hey, random thought. What if you put up a sign or something asking people to be patient? Like some customers might actually appreciate knowing you're trying to be inclusive, might be good for business in a different way." And Jean looked at him like he'd suggested setting money on fire. "You think people in this town care about that? They want fast food and cheap prices. They don't want to write down their order on a notepad." And Lucas shrugged. "Maybe you're right. I just figure it can't hurt to try. Worst case, nothing changes. Best case, you get a few customers who specifically come here because of it. I don't know, man. Just a thought. Gene was quiet for a second, staring at the old register. Then he said, I'll think about it, in a tone that meant he wouldn't think about it. And Lucas let it drop because he'd said his piece, and anything more would be pushing, and he wasn't trying to save anybody or fix anything. He was just a guy who'd had a thought and shared it. But the next Thursday, when they came in, there was a little chalkboard propped up by the register that said in Gene's chicken scratch handwriting, "We're working on being more inclusive, your patience appreciated." And Lucas felt this small surprise satisfaction that Gene had actually listened. Over the next few weeks, Lucas noticed some people read the sign and nodded. Some people didn't even see it. And one older guy actually complained out loud that this was political correctness gone crazy over a damn chalkboard sign. And Gene's face stayed neutral while he took the guy's order because you can't argue with customers, even when they're being ridiculous. The diner didn't suddenly fill up with grateful, inclusive-minded folks. Business stayed exactly the same, maybe dropped off a tiny bit when a couple regulars stopped coming. But maybe that was coincidence, and Gene kept the sign up because it wasn't costing him anything. And who knows, maybe it helped a little. Lucas was getting gas at the station next to the grocery store on a random Tuesday when he saw Hannah through the window stocking shelves in the cereal aisle. And before he could talk himself out of it, he finished pumping and walked inside like he needed to buy something. He grabbed a cart and wheeled it toward the cereal, pretending to look at prices. And Hannah glanced up and did a double take when she recognized him. And her face went through this quick sequence of surprise, wariness, and then cautious friendliness. And Lucas said, "Hey, Hannah," making sure she could see his face clearly. And she smiled small and pulled out her phone and typed. Showed him the screen that said, "Hi, Lucas, where's Maisie?" Lucas said, "She's at school. I'm just grabbing some stuff on my lunch break," which was a lie because he'd come in specifically to talk to her. But that felt like too much to admit, and Hannah typed again, "Tell her I said hi. She's a sweet kid." And Lucas said, "I will. Hey, I noticed you weren't at the diner anymore. Everything okay?" Hannah's face shifted and she typed slower this time. Showed him, "Gene had to let me go. Too many complaints. It's fine. I needed more hours here anyway." And the way she said it's fine made it real clear it wasn't fine, but she wasn't going to fall apart about it in the grocery store cereal aisle. Lucas felt that same tightness in his chest and said, "That sucks. I'm sorry. For what it's worth, you were the best waitress they had. Always friendly. Maisie was bummed when we didn't see you." And Hannah's eyes got a little shiny, but she blinked it away and typed, "Thank you. That means a lot, actually." And then her phone buzzed and she glanced at it and made an apologetic face and typed, "I have to get back to work. Manager's strict about phone use on the floor." And Lucas said, "Yeah, of course. Hey, can I give you my number? Just in case you ever want to grab coffee or something. No pressure." Hannah looked at him for a long second, like she was trying to figure out if this was pity or charity or something else. And Lucas kept his face open and honest because it wasn't any of those things. He just thought she seemed like someone who could use a friend in this town, and he knew what it felt like to be isolated, and maybe that was enough reason. She handed him her phone, and he put his number in and texted himself so he'd have hers. And she gave him a real smile and a little wave and went back to stocking, and he left feeling like he'd done something right for once. He texted her that night, nothing heavy, just, "Hey, it's Lucas. Hope the rest of your shift wasn't too brutal." And she responded an hour later, "Not too bad. Thanks for saying hi today." And that was it. Just a normal exchange between two people being friendly. He texted a few more times over the next 2 weeks, super casual stuff, once asking if she'd found any good coffee shops in town, and she said no, everywhere has terrible coffee. Once mentioning that Maisie asked if she'd found another job, and Hannah said she was picking up more hours at the store. And her responses were polite but short, not rude, just clearly not interested in extended conversation. Lucas got the message after the second week when he sent, "Maisie's school is doing a fall festival thing this weekend. If you're around and want to come, no pressure." And Hannah responded 6 hours later with just, "Thanks, but I'm working. Appreciate the invite, though." And he realized he was doing that thing where guys convince themselves they're just being friendly when really they're hoping for something more. And Hannah was being nice about shutting it down, but she was definitely shutting it down. He didn't text again after that, Just let it fade out natural, and honestly, he felt kind of relieved because his life was complicated enough without adding whatever this was to the mix. What Lucas didn't know was that Hannah had stared at that fall festival text for 20 minutes trying to figure out how to respond. Because part of her actually wanted to go, wanted to see Maisie and meet Lucas somewhere outside of transactional spaces and maybe let herself have one afternoon of normal human connection. But the other part, the part that had kept her alive and moving forward for the past 8 months, knew that going to a school festival with a guy and his kid was exactly the kind of thing that led to attachment. And attachment led to staying. And staying led to being trapped, and she'd worked too hard to get untrapped to risk it now over some nice electrician and his sweet daughter. So she'd sent the polite decline and felt relieved and disappointed in equal measure. And she'd gone to work that weekend and walked dogs and stocked shelves and counted her money, which was up to $2,116 now. And she told herself she'd done the right thing keeping her distance. But man, it felt lonely in a way she hadn't let herself feel in a really long time. 3 months of silence passed between Lucas and Hannah, and in that time, a whole lot of small, ordinary life happened that nobody was paying attention to because that's how real change works, not in dramatic moments, but in the quiet accumulation of days that add up to something different than what you started with. Lucas kept taking Maisie to therapy every Thursday, and her stutter got a little better, not fixed because that's not how speech issues work, but manageable enough that she was talking more at school and even joined the after-school art club, which was huge for a kid who'd been hiding in silence for months. And Lucas was so proud of her, he almost cried at the parent-teacher conference when Miss Rodriguez told him Maisie had volunteered to read her poem out loud in class. Hannah kept working her 3 jobs and watched her savings account tick up slowly. 2,400, 2,700, 2,950, and every $100 felt like a brick in the wall she was building between herself and the life she'd left behind. The one that had been small and suffocating and made her feel like she was disappearing. She had her routine down to a science now. Diner shifts Monday, Wednesday, Friday, Saturday nights. Grocery store Tuesday, Thursday, Sunday mornings. Dog walking gig every weekend afternoon. Sleep somewhere in between. Rinse and repeat. And it was exhausting, but it was hers and nobody could take it from her. But something started shifting in her head around late November. Nothing dramatic, just this quiet, persistent thought that kept showing up when she was stocking canned goods or clearing tables or walking Mrs. Patterson's ancient golden retriever, who moved at approximately 1 mile per hour. The thought was this: what if running away from every place before you could get hurt also meant running away from every chance to actually have a life? And Hannah didn't like that thought at all, because it meant examining the pattern she'd been living in for years. Moving from town to town, staying just long enough to save money, then leaving before anything could go wrong. She'd been seeing a therapist since August, this woman named Dr. Reeves, who worked on a sliding scale out of a community health center and specialized in trauma. And Hannah had started going because the nightmares about her ex had come back, and she needed tools to deal with them that didn't involve just white-knuckling through panic attacks alone in her apartment. Dr. Reeves was good, didn't push, just asked questions that made Hannah think. And in one session in early December, she'd asked, what would it look like if you let yourself stay somewhere? Really stay, roots and all. And Hannah had said, terrifying. It would look terrifying. And Dr. Reeves had just nodded and said, okay, but why terrifying? And Hannah had to sit with that. The answer that came up was because every time she'd put down roots before someone had ripped them up, her parents when they'd kicked her out for being gay, her ex who'd isolated her from every friend she'd tried to make, the job she'd lost in Michigan when they'd downsized and decided the deaf employee was expendable, and it felt safer to just keep moving than to risk that kind of loss again. But Dr. Reeves had said something that stuck in Hannah's brain like a splinter. She'd said, the opposite of being hurt isn't being alone. It's being connected to people who won't hurt you. And you'll never find those people if you leave before you give them a chance. And Hannah had gone home and cried for an hour because she knew it was true and hated it. Right before Christmas, the grocery store promoted her to inventory manager, which came with $4 more an hour in benefits and actual set hours instead of the random on-call schedule she'd been working. And her manager, Brad, told her, You're the most reliable person we've got. You show up on time. You don't call in sick. You just do the work. We need more people like you." And Hannah had felt this weird, unfamiliar thing that she eventually recognized as pride. Like maybe she was building something here that mattered even if it was just a grocery store job in a small town. The promotion meant she could drop one of her other jobs, and she chose the dog walking gig because the weekend hours were exhausting, and Mrs. Patterson's ancient golden retriever had finally passed away last month anyway. And suddenly she had breathing room in her schedule for the first time in months, actual free time that wasn't spent running between jobs or collapsing in exhaustion. She was sitting in her apartment on New Year's Eve doing the math again and realized she had enough saved to move to Columbus by February if she wanted to. $3,200, which was more than enough for the fresh start she'd been planning. And she pulled up apartment listings on her phone and scrolled through them, feeling nothing. No excitement, no relief. Just this flat, empty feeling like she was looking at someone else's future. That's when she knew she'd already made the decision without admitting it to herself. She didn't want to leave. She wanted to stay here and see what happened. If she actually let herself have a life instead of just a survival plan. And that realization was scary as hell, but also kind of freeing. She texted Lucas on January 3rd, hadn't talked to him in almost 3 months, just sent, "Is the coffee at Murphy's still terrible?" and stared at her phone for 10 minutes, convinced he'd either ignore her or respond with something polite and distant because she'd shut him down pretty hard last time. But his response came through 2 minutes later. "Absolutely the worst. Pretty sure Gene hasn't changed the filter since 2008. Want to risk it anyway." And Hannah smiled at her phone like an idiot and typed back, "Yeah, when are you free?" And just like that, they made plans to meet Saturday morning. Lucas got there first and was sitting in their old booth when Hannah walked in, and she saw him see her, and his whole face did this thing where he lit up for half a second before controlling it into something more casual, and she slid into the seat across from him, feeling nervous in a way she hadn't felt in years. Jean came over with coffee, looking surprised to see them together, and Hannah pulled out her phone to order, but Jean waved her off and said slow and clear while looking right at her face, "Good to see you, Hannah, the usual." And Hannah was so shocked he remembered and was making the effort that she just nodded, and Jean smiled and walked away. And Lucas said, "He's been better about that lately. Think your sign idea stuck with him a little." They talked for an hour, and it wasn't awkward. Lucas told her about Maisie's progress in therapy and how she was doing better, but still had hard days. Hannah told him about the promotion and how weird it felt to think about actually staying in town instead of planning her exit. And at some point, Lucas said, "Can I ask why you went quiet for a few months? Did I do something wrong?" And Hannah appreciated that he just asked directly instead of dancing around it. She said, "No, you didn't do anything wrong. I got scared. I've spent a long time keeping people at a distance because it feels safer. And you were being nice to me, and your kid was being nice to me, and I didn't know how to handle that without running." And Lucas looked at her with this understanding that felt like he actually got it and said, "I know that feeling. After Maisie's mom and I split, I spent 2 years just focusing on work and my kid because people felt like too much risk." Hannah blinked because this was the first time he'd mentioned Maisie's mom, and she'd assumed he was widowed like a lot of single dads in these stories. And Lucas caught her expression and said, "Oh yeah, sorry, I probably should have clarified this before. I'm not a widower. My ex-wife left when Maisie was 4. She struggled with some mental health stuff and decided she couldn't do the parent thing, signed over custody and moved to Oregon. We haven't heard from her in 3 years." And his voice was matter of fact, but Hannah could hear the old hurt under it. She said, "That must have been really hard on both of you." And Lucas shrugged. "It was. Still is sometimes. Maisie asks about her occasionally, and I never know what to say. But we're managing, just taking it one day at a time, you know." They made plans to meet again the following week, and then the week after that, and it became this regular thing where they'd grab coffee on Saturday mornings and just talk. Nothing romantic, just two people who understood what it felt like to be rebuilding a life from scratch and appreciated having someone else who got it. Around the third week, Lucas asked carefully, "You mentioned once that you came here to get away from something. You don't have to tell me details, but I guess I just want to know you're safe." and Hannah appreciated that he asked without pushing. She typed on her phone and showed him. There was someone before who hurt me. I left. I'm safe now. He doesn't know where I am. I don't want to talk about specifics yet. And Lucas just nodded and said, okay, whenever you're ready, no rush. And that was exactly the response she needed. Maisie knew Hannah was around again. Lucas had mentioned it casually and Maisie had said, oh, cool, is she nice? And Lucas said, yeah, she's really nice. And Maisie said, okay, and went back to drawing because she was 9, and her dad's friends weren't that interesting unless they were directly relevant to her life. Around March, Lucas invited Hannah over for dinner with him and Maisie, and Hannah almost said no out of reflex, but pushed through the fear and said yes. And it was surprisingly normal. Maisie showed her the paintings she'd done in art club and told Hannah about her deaf friend, Zoe, from her old school, said she'd been video calling her to practice signs and wanted to teach her everything Hannah was teaching her. And Hannah showed Maisie some new signs, and they made spaghetti together that was slightly overcooked, but nobody cared. After Maisie went to bed, Lucas and Hannah sat on the porch drinking terrible wine from the gas station. And Lucas said, I really like spending time with you, like more than friends like, and I wanted to say that out loud so we're on the same page. But there's zero pressure, I'm not expecting anything. And Hannah felt her heart pounding and said, I like spending time with you too. I'm just really bad at this, at letting people in, at believing good things can stay good. Lucas said, me too. We can figure it out together if you want. Go slow, see what happens. No expectations, just seeing where it goes. And Hannah said, yeah, I'd like that. And they sat there in comfortable silence, watching the streetlights flicker. And it felt like the beginning of something real and uncertain and worth trying for. Over the next few months, they dated in the most low-key way possible. Dinner once a week, coffee on Saturdays, texting throughout the day about random stuff, and Hannah met Maisie's therapist and Lucas's brother and slowly got integrated into the edges of his life while he got integrated into hers. 8 months after that first coffee at Murphy's, Hannah and Lucas were officially together in that way, where everyone just kind of knew without a big announcement. And Maisie liked Hannah fine, thought she was cool and funny and nice, but also had her own stuff going on, with school and friends and art club. And the three of them had dinner together twice a week. But it wasn't this instant perfect family unit. It was just 3 people figuring out how to exist in each other's space. Hannah still hadn't decided if she was staying in town forever, still had moments of panic where she thought about running, but she was learning to sit with the discomfort instead of acting on it. And Lucas was learning that loving someone meant giving them space to be uncertain without taking it personally. The diner hired a young man that summer named Tyler, who had autism and was great with numbers, but struggled with social stuff. And Jean had gotten into the habit of accommodating different needs now. Put up another little sign that said, patient customers appreciated. We're all doing our best. And some people loved it and some people complained, and the business stayed basically the same. And that was fine. Progress didn't have to be revolutionary to matter. Lucas and Hannah were at Murphy's on a random Thursday with Maisie, who was reading a book and half listening to them talk. And Jean brought over their food and signed enjoy in ASL, which Hannah had taught him a few weeks back. Just that one sign, and it was small, but it meant something. Hannah looked around at Lucas, who was stealing a fry off her plate, at Maisie, who was completely absorbed in her fantasy novel, at Jean, who was wiping down the counter and humming off key to the radio, and she felt this quiet, settled feeling that she eventually recognized as contentment. Not fireworks or overwhelming joy, just the steady knowledge that she was exactly where she was supposed to be right now. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is let yourself put down roots in imperfect soil with imperfect people and trust that it's okay if it doesn't last forever as long as it's real right now. And Hannah was learning that lesson one day at a time, one coffee date at a time, one Thursday dinner at a time. If this story reminded you that healing isn't linear and community isn't perfect, and sometimes the smallest gestures create the biggest shifts in how we see ourselves and each other, go ahead and hit that subscribe button, drop a comment telling us where you're watching from, and share this with someone who needs to hear that it's okay to stop running and let yourself be found. Thanks for being here with us. We'll see you in the next one.